There's a Toyota owner right now following the instructions exactly, doing everything by the book, and a mechanic just handed them an engine teardown showing sludge caked around the oil pickup tube. They changed their oil at 10,000 miles, just like the sticker said, just like the manual said, and the engine is coated in varnish. So the question isn't whether Toyota is a reliable brand. They are by almost every measure. The question is whether that 10,000 mile interval applies to you in your car the way you actually drive it. Because buried inside that same owner's manual is a table most people never read, and it tells a very different story. Open a Toyota owner's manual, any model from the last 10 years, and you'll find the maintenance schedule that everyone references. Oil and filter change every 10,000 miles or 12 months. Clear, simple, easy to follow. But flip back a few pages, and there's a section called Special Operating Conditions, or sometimes Severe Service. Toyota defines this as frequent short trips under 5 miles, stop-and-go traffic, dusty or sandy environments, towing or hauling heavy loads, and extreme temperature driving, very hot or very cold. Under those conditions, the recommended interval drops to 5,000 miles. Here's where it gets interesting. Look at that severe service list again. Short trips under 5 miles, stop-and-go traffic, extreme temperatures. If you live in a city, commute in traffic, run errands, deal with winters or summers in the south, Toyota's own document is telling you that the 10,000 mile interval may not be the one that applies to your situation. Most people never see this. They see the big number on the sticker and they go by it. That's not their fault. That's how it's presented. But the fine print exists, and ignoring it has consequences. I reached out to 3 independent mechanics who specialize in Toyota vehicles, one running a shop in Phoenix, one in the Chicago area, and one in Atlanta. 3 different climates, 3 different driving environments. And what they told me about this interval paints a really clear picture of the gap between what the spec sheet says and what ends up on the lift. The Phoenix mechanic, he's been working on Toyotas for over 20 years, told me he sees the most sludge-related wear on vehicles driven by people doing short daily commutes in intense heat. The oil gets hot fast. Fuel dilution is higher on short trips because the engine never fully reaches operating temperature to burn it off, and by the time the oil is actually sampled or changed, it's been working under stress conditions that a lab test in controlled temperature didn't replicate. The Chicago mechanic said cold starts are where he focuses his concern. In sub-zero winters, 0W20 oil, which is what most current Toyota 4-cylinders specify, behaves very differently than it does at 70 degrees. During those first few minutes after a cold start, then the oil is still flowing slowly to critical engine components. If the oil has been degrading for months and thousands of cold start cycles, its ability to protect metal surfaces during that vulnerable window is diminished. The Atlanta mechanic had a different angle. He said the conversation he keeps having is with people who tow boats, trailers, campers, and assume because their mileage is low, they're fine. I've seen engines with 6,000 miles on the oil that look like they've been running for 15,000, he told me. Mileage isn't the only clock. 3 mechanics, 3 cities. Same conclusion? The interval is not a one-size situation. To really understand why, you need to know what's actually happening to the oil during those 10,000 miles. And this is the part most oil change conversations skip over. Synthetic oil doesn't just get used up the way conventional oil does, it doesn't break down at the same rate. That's the whole reason extended drain intervals became possible. But more durable doesn't mean immune to degradation. It means the degradation happens differently and more slowly. Here's the key concept. Total base number, or TBN. Think of it like a reserve tank of alkalinity in the oil. Your engine produces acidic combustion byproducts, sulfuric acid precursors, nitric oxide compounds, and the oil's additive package neutralizes them. The TBN measures how much neutralizing capacity is left. Fresh synthetic oil in a Toyota specification starts with a TBN around 7 to 9, depending on the brand. When that number drops to around 2, the oil's ability to protect against acid corrosion is essentially spent. The degradation rate depends on how hard the engine is working, how hot it runs, how much fuel gets past the rings, into the crankcase, which is higher in direct injection engines, and how long the oil sits between drives. Toyota introduced direct injection across most of its lineup starting in the mid-2010s. The 2AR-FE, the 8AR-FTS, the 825A. These are all direct injection or port and direct injection setups. Direct injection means fuel is sprayed directly into the cylinder rather than the intake port, which improves efficiency and power. But it also means fuel doesn't wash the intake valves the way port injection does, hence the carbon buildup issue many owners know about. And it contributes to fuel dilution, small amounts of unburned fuel that slip past the piston rings and contaminate the oil. On a long highway drive, this isn't a big problem. The engine gets hot, the fuel evaporates out of the oil through the PCV system, and the oil stays relatively clean. On a short daily commute, say 4 miles each way, the engine may never get fully up to operating temperature on a cold morning. The fuel dilution accumulates, the oil gets thinner than its rated viscosity, and 0W20, which is already on the thinner end of the spectrum, by design, has less margin to lose before it's no longer protecting metal surfaces the way it should. That thinning effect is called viscosity loss. Normal synthetic oil should maintain its rated viscosity range throughout the drain interval. But used oil analysis data shows that fuel dilution can drop effective viscosity by 10 to 20% in real-world short-trip driving. For an oil that's already at the thinner end of the multi-grade range, that's not a comfortable buffer. And there's one more factor that doesn't show up in mileage at all: time. Oil oxidizes. It reacts with oxygen, especially at high temperatures. Oxidation thickens the oil, reduces flow, and contributes to the varnish and sludge deposits mechanics describe. If you're driving 7,000 miles a year, which is below average, you might hit the 12-month mark before you hit 10,000 miles. The calendar trigger exists for a reason. The oil doesn't know it hasn't been driven far. It knows it's been sitting, cycling through heat and cold for a year. Now, let's look at the actual data. Blackstone Laboratories, probably the most widely cited independent oil analysis service in the automotive community, publishes aggregate wear data from engine oil samples sent in by owners. When you look at Toyota 4-cylinder samples, a pattern emerges that's worth sitting with. Samples taken at 5,000 miles consistently show iron and aluminum wear metals in a range that analysts describe as normal, within healthy baseline limits. Samples taken at 10,000 miles in similar engines show more variability. The average numbers are still within acceptable range for controlled driving conditions, but the spread widens. There are more outlier samples at higher wear metal concentrations, and the samples that come in elevated almost always have something in common: short trips, high heat, or both. Blackstone's own published guidance on Toyota synthetic oil intervals notes that 10,000 miles is achievable under highway-dominant, low-stress driving. For mixed or severe conditions, their analysts recommend 5,000 to 7,500 miles as a more conservative target. There's also a relevant technical service bulletin worth knowing about. TSB 094-13 and related bulletins for certain model years addressed oil consumption concerns in Toyota 4-cylinder engines, specifically the 2AR-FE, found in Camrys, RAV4s, and Highlanders from that period. The TSB acknowledged that some engines consumed more oil than expected between intervals. The suggested fix involved updated piston rings and a dealer-level inspection process. The bulletin didn't directly say the 10,000-mile interval was the cause, but it's notable that a bulletin addressing oil consumption was issued for engines running that same interval in real-world conditions. If you pull this engine apart after extended drain intervals and severe service, here's what you'd find: varnish coating on the piston, rings, a brownish lacquer-like buildup that reduces ring seal and increases oil consumption, deposits on the variable valve timing actuators, which rely on clean oil pressure to function correctly, sometimes sludge near the oil pickup tube, which sits at the bottom of the oil pan and draws oil up to the pump. If that pickup gets partially blocked, oil pressure drops, and you're now running an engine with inadequate lubrication. None of this is inevitable, but all of it is avoidable. Here's the thing: Toyota's reasoning for the extended interval isn't arbitrary, and it's worth understanding before drawing conclusions. Toyota Engineering designed and validated the 10,000-mile interval using their own testing methodology. They ran engines on standardized drive cycles, measured wear, and determined that full synthetic oil meeting Toyota's GF6A specification and their 0W20 recommendation can maintain adequate protection to 10,000 miles under those conditions. Their testing is real. Their engineers are not reckless. The issue is the word conditions. The SAE test cycles and manufacturer drive cycles used in that validation are not your commute. They're standardized sequences of acceleration, speed, and load that produce repeatable, comparable data. They're designed for consistency, not for replicating the worst-case scenarios that actual owners encounter daily. Toyota tested for a specific driver profile. If your driving matches that profile, or predominantly highway miles, moderate temperatures, no towing, adequate warm-up time, the 10,000-mile interval may genuinely be fine for your engine. Toyota isn't making up numbers. But if your driving doesn't match that profile, and the severe service definition applies to you even partially, then their own documentation is already telling you that a different interval is the right one. The gap isn't between you and Toyota. It's between the ideal test driver and the person actually sitting in the car. So let's make this practical. Here's how to actually think about your interval. If you drive predominantly the highway miles, think 70% or more highway, stable temperatures, no towing, engine gets fully warmed up regularly. The 10,000 mile or 12-month interval with a quality full synthetic is likely reasonable for your engine. This is the scenario Toyota validated. If you do a lot of short trips, under 10 miles round trip, frequent cold starts, mostly city driving, cut the interval to 5,000 miles. This isn't being overly cautious. This is applying Toyota's own severe service definition. If you live somewhere with extreme temperatures, below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, in winter, or consistently above 95 in summer with a lot of stop and go, the same applies. 5,000 miles, or consider a 5W30 full synthetic, if you're concerned about cold start viscosity and you're not under factory warranty. If you tow anything regularly, a small boat, a utility trailer, a camper, your oil is working significantly harder than the spec assumes. Treat every towing trip as an accelerant on that degradation clock. Some Toyota towing guides specifically call for reduced intervals. Check your supplement. If you have a turbocharged Toyota, the 2.0T in certain GR models, or the 2.5 hybrid system, turbos run hot and put additional thermal stress on the oil. More frequent changes make sense regardless of driving conditions. Here's a physical check you can do this week. Pull your dipstick. Don't just look at the level. Look at the oil color and texture. Fresh synthetic is amber and clear. Oil that's been working hard gets darker, sometimes almost black. Rub a small amount between your fingers. It should feel smooth, not gritty. If it feels like there's a slight grain to it, that's wear metal suspension. The oil is carrying particles it's picked up. That engine deserves a change sooner rather than later. And when you do change it, consider sending a sample to Blackstone or a similar lab before draining. It costs about $30 and it tells you exactly what your oil was doing, how much wear was occurring, and whether your current interval is appropriate for your actual engine. One test gives you more data than 10 opinions. One more thing worth saying directly. If you're a Toyota owner and you've been doing 10,000 mile changes for years without any issues, that doesn't mean the interval is wrong for you. It may mean your driving profile matches the conditions it was designed for. Not every engine on that schedule is suffering. But it does mean you should understand what conditions keep it working safely, and what would make it stop working that way. The fine print isn't there to confuse you. It's there because Toyota's engineers know that the same engine behaves differently depending on how it's used. Reading that fine print and applying it honestly to how you actually drive is the difference between an interval that protects your engine and one that slowly wears it down. If this made you rethink what's actually in that maintenance schedule, drop your engine code and mileage in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what people are actually running out there and whether anyone's done used oil analysis on one of these. That data from real owners is more useful than any lab spec sheet. And if you know a Toyota owner who's been on 10,000 mile intervals for years without ever questioning it, send this their way. Not to scare them, but because knowing what the fine print actually says is worth 5 minutes of anyone's time. Subscribe if you want the follow-up where I get into the variable, valve timing oil pressure issues that show up when maintenance gets stretched too long.